You think you've seen Seth Rollins angry before? You think you know what happens when the visionary loses control? 2 minutes ago, the entire WWE locker room witnessed something that will haunt them for weeks. Seth Rollins didn't just snap, he exploded. And when I tell you what just went down backstage, when I show you the absolute chaos that erupted behind those curtains, you're going to lose your mind. Bron Breakker thought he was safe. Bronson Reed thought the numbers were in their favor. They were dead wrong. What you're about to witness is the most unhinged, most visceral, most brutal backstage assault we've seen in years, and if you think you can scroll past this, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. Hit that like button right now because this is about to get insane. Drop a comment telling me if Seth went too far, and share this with every wrestling fan who needs to see what happens when you push a man past his breaking point. And if you're not subscribed to Ring Rumble yet, do yourself a favor, hit that subscribe button because we're the only channel bringing you this level of breaking news, this fast, this raw, this real. The tension had been building for weeks. Every single person watching Raw, SmackDown, and every WWE event knew this was coming. You could feel it in the air. Seth Rollins, the architect, the revolutionary, the man who has given everything to this business, had been systematically targeted, brutalized, and humiliated by two of the most dangerous monsters on the roster. Bron Breakker, the next-generation powerhouse with a last name that carries the weight of wrestling royalty and the strength of a freight train. Bronson Reed, 300 pounds of Samoan devastation, who has made a career out of ending careers. These two behemoths formed an unholy alliance with one singular purpose: destroy Seth Rollins. They attacked him during matches. They jumped him after victories. They sent him through announce tables, they crushed him with sentence from the top rope, they speared him through barricades. Week after week, Seth's body absorbed punishment that would have retired lesser men. His ribs were taped. His back was covered in bruises that looked like abstract art painted in purple and black. His wife Becky Lynch watched from home, probably begging him to walk away, to let this go, to choose his health over his pride. But Seth Rollins doesn't know how to quit. Seth Rollins doesn't understand the concept of backing down. And tonight, 2 minutes ago, Seth Rollins showed the entire world what happens when you mistake his resilience for weakness. The arena was still buzzing from the main event segment. Fans were filing out, production crew was breaking down equipment, and backstage, most of the roster was in various states of winding down, some in catering, others in the trainer's room, many already changed and heading to their rental cars. Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed were in the heel locker room, laughing. Actually laughing. Can you believe that? They were celebrating another successful night of making Seth Rollins' life a living hell, probably planning their next attack, probably deciding which body part to target next. They felt invincible. They felt untouchable. They were surrounded by other heels who respected their dominance, who feared their power, who wouldn't dare cross them. And that's when the door exploded off its hinges. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not using hyperbole for effect. The door didn't open, it was destroyed. Seth Rollins came through that entrance like a man possessed by every demon that's ever existed. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, focused with the kind of intensity that makes your blood run cold. He wasn't dressed in his ring gear anymore. He was in street clothes, his fists already taped, his knuckles already bloody from God knows what he punched on his way there. And the sound that came out of his mouth wasn't a scream, it was a roar. A primal, guttural war cry that made everyone in that locker room freeze in absolute terror. Bron Breakker turned first, his cocky smile evaporating in a fraction of a second. He barely had time to raise his hands before Seth was on him. The first punch caught Bron flush on the jaw, a shot that echoed through the hallway like a gunshot. Bron stumbled backward, crashing into an equipment case, and Seth didn't give him even a millisecond to recover. He unleashed a flurry of punches that would make a UFC fighter jealous. Left, right, each one connecting with bone-crushing accuracy. Bron tried to cover up, tried to use his amateur wrestling background to shoot for a takedown, but Seth sprawled with the instinct of a man who's been in 10,000 fights and dropped elbows onto the back of Bron's head like he was trying to drive him through the concrete floor. Bronson Reed finally processed what was happening and charged at Seth like a runaway semi-truck. 300 pounds of pure mass moving at shocking speed. But Seth sidestepped at the last possible second with the grace of a matador, and Reed crashed face-first into a steel equipment rack with a sound that made everyone watching wince. The impact dented the metal. Dented it. Reed's nose exploded in a fountain of crimson, and he stumbled backward, dazed and disoriented. Seth grabbed a nearby monitor cable, the thick kind they use for the production equipment, and before anyone could intervene, he wrapped it around Reed's throat and yanked backward with every ounce of strength in his body. The scene was pandemonium. Other wrestlers started pouring into the hallway, faces who wanted to pull Seth off, heels who didn't know whether to help Breakker and Reed or save themselves. Producers were screaming into their headsets. Security was sprinting from every direction. And Seth Rollins was in the center of it all, a one-man army fighting a war against two monsters who had made the fatal mistake of thinking he would eventually break. Bron Breakker recovered enough to grab a steel chair, because of course he did, and swung it at Seth's head with the clear intention of ending this fight permanently. But Seth released the cable from Reed's throat, ducked under the chair shot with inches to spare, and as Bron's momentum carried him forward, Seth caught him with a pedigree Triple H's move, the move Seth used to use as part of the Shield, driving Bron's face into the concrete floor with such force that the sound reverberated through the entire backstage area. Bron went limp, completely unconscious, out cold, done. Bronson Reed was back on his feet now, blood streaming down his face, rage replacing the shock in his eyes. He grabbed Seth from behind in a bear hug, lifting him off the ground, squeezing with the intention of breaking ribs, maybe even puncturing a lung. Seth's face turned red, then purple, the air being crushed out of his body. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like Reed had him. Like this was where Seth's rampage would end. But then Seth did something nobody expected. He threw his head backward once, twice, 3 times, each headbutt connecting with Reed's already broken nose, and on the third impact, Reed's grip loosened just enough for Seth to slip free. The visionary stumbled forward, gasping for air, his ribs screaming in agony, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He grabbed a production crate, one of the heavy ones that probably weighs 50 pounds, lifted it above his head with a surge of adrenaline that defied human physiology, and slammed it down onto Bronson Reed's back. Reed dropped to his knees. Seth hit him again, and again, and again. Each impact accompanied by Seth screaming actual words, at first, cursing, threatening, promising that this would never end, but eventually just raw, wordless fury. Security finally managed to swarm Seth. It took 8 men to restrain him, and even then he was still fighting, still trying to get to Breaker and Reed, still consumed by a rage that seemed to have no bottom. His shirt was torn, his face was covered in a mixture of his blood and theirs, his chest was heaving like he'd just run a marathon while fighting a war. And through it all, through the chaos and the screaming and the officials trying to restore order, Seth's eyes never left his targets. Even as they dragged him backward, even as trainers rushed to check on the fallen Breaker and bleeding Reed, Seth was staring at them with an intensity that promised this was far from over. The cameras caught everything, and I mean everything. This wasn't a worked shoot. This wasn't a carefully choreographed segment for television. This was real. This was a man who had been pushed past every conceivable limit, finally unleashing months of accumulated pain, frustration, and righteous anger on the 2 individuals responsible for his suffering. The footage is going to be all over social media within the hour. Twitter is about to explode. Instagram is going to crash. Every wrestling news site from here to Japan is going to have this as their headline. But here's what makes this even more insane. Here's the part that's going to have consequences for weeks, if not months. As security was finally getting Seth under control, as they were physically carrying him away from the scene, Adam Pearce came running around the corner. The Raw general manager, the man responsible for maintaining order on the flagship show, looked at the carnage, at Bron Breakker still unconscious on the floor, at Bronson Reed being attended to by 3 trainers trying to stop the bleeding from his nose, at the destroyed locker room door, the dented equipment, the chaos, and he made a decision that's going to change everything. He suspended Seth Rollins indefinitely. The crowd that had gathered backstage, wrestlers, producers, camera operators, everyone went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Seth stopped struggling against security, his body going rigid with shock and disbelief. After everything Breakker and Reed had done to him, after all the unprovoked attacks, after being jumped 3-on-1 multiple times, after having his career threatened week after week, he was the one being punished. He was the one facing suspension. The injustice of it hit everyone watching like a physical blow. Seth's reaction was heartbreaking. The rage drained out of him, replaced by something worse: resignation. Bitter, painful resignation. He stopped fighting. He let security release him. And he just stood there, blood dripping from his knuckles, breathing heavily, staring at Adam Pearce with an expression that mixed betrayal, anger, and something that looked almost like relief. Like maybe, after everything, after all these years of giving his body and soul to this company, maybe it was time to walk away. Maybe this was the universe telling him that loyalty gets you nothing but pain. But then, and this is what's going to keep you up at night, as Seth turned to leave, as he started walking away from the scene of his justified rampage, he paused. He looked back over his shoulder at Bron Breakker, who was just starting to regain consciousness, and at Bronson Reed, who was glaring at him through the blood still streaming from his broken nose. And Seth smiled. Not a happy smile. Not a cocky smile. A terrifying smile. The smile of a man who knows that suspensions end, but vengeance is forever. He pointed at both of them, a deliberate, slow gesture that everyone in that hallway understood. This wasn't over. This suspension might keep him away for a week, maybe 2, maybe even a month. But when he came back, when that suspension was lifted and he returned to Raw, he was going to finish what he started. And next time, there wouldn't be enough security in the world to stop him. The implications of this are staggering. We're looking at potentially the hottest storyline of the year, maybe the hottest storyline in years. Seth Rollins versus Bron Breakker and Bronson Reed has evolved from a simple feud into something primal, something visceral, something that transcends normal wrestling storylines. This is personal. This is real. And when Seth comes back, and he will come back, the explosion is going to be nuclear. So here's what you need to do right now. Smash that like button if you think Seth was justified in everything he did tonight. Drop a comment telling me whether you think the suspension was fair or if Adam Pearce made a massive mistake. Share this video with every single wrestling fan in your life because this is the story that's going to dominate the industry for the foreseeable future. And if you haven't subscribed to Ring Rumble yet, look, we work incredibly hard to bring you this kind of breaking news the second it happens. We're a small channel trying to compete with the giants, and we rely on your support to keep doing what we love. That subscribe button doesn't cost you anything, but it means everything to us. It helps us grow, it helps us bring you more content, it helps us stay on top of every major story in wrestling. Seth Rollins just went to war. And this war is far from over. Stay tuned to Ring Rumble because we'll be covering every single development, every backstage rumor, every update on Seth's suspension, and most importantly, we'll be here when the Visionary returns to finish what he started. This is just the beginning.